And good morning. Welcome back to the woods. And day 4, week 28, October the 31st. It is Halloween, or Samhain, or Samhain, whatever you want to call it. And I'm going to start off today's episode with a little bit of history, as a squirrel tries to run directly down the path away from me. So this is for Matilda, all the way over in Australia, on the other side of the planet. Wanted to know where we get Halloween from. So, what you've got to imagine is that you're in an agrarian stroke hunter-gatherer society, and your year, as you work through it, is divided into times when it is good to do stuff. So there's a good time to plant things if you're raising crops, and animals tend to have a very strictly adhered to mating season, and so there are various points in the year that you're going to mark. So as soon as you can count how many full moons you get in a year, which is, one intelligent person in a tribe works out that the moon is full 13 times a year, and that would be what we now call a lunar month. So every 28 days we see a full moon, which means that there are around 13 of them every year. So you start from a set point, and usually people started at a point around the 22nd to the 23rd of what we now call December. There is a point at which the sun rises no more than a few degrees above the horizon, and immediately above that is the North Star. So when you can see the North Star, that's the very middle of winter. And after you see that in the sky, you'll actually notice that if you start counting the full moons, you get like a map of the year. So you count to 13, and then that happens again. So you roughly know how long a year is as you see the passing of the seasons, the die-off in the winter and the new life coming in the spring. You can start mapping things out. Now, the plants also know this, and if you're gathering plants and you're hunting for food, game becomes much more scarce towards the end of October, or what we now call October. We actually use a Roman calendar based on a Greek calendar. And by about the end of October, food and game, if you're gathering, becomes much more scarce. So once you've made it through a winter and you've had a really terrible time, living on preserved food or dried fruit that you've gathered in September, October time, and you've had a hard time hunting any game, to the point where it's not worth the calories to go out and look for the odd rabbit that might still be awake and not hibernating, then you basically got to the end of your prosperous time in the year. And so we're now officially at the end of October. You've got this situation where you're settling in for the winter, you're not going too far from home, it's getting dark very, very early, and the work day is extremely short. And it's extremely short for plants and animals as well. So at the end of that, then there is a little bit of a holiday to celebrate that you've gathered all the food that you're going to gather, you've preserved all the meat that you're going to get from animals, and you're settling in for the winter, and you want everybody to stick close to home. So at about this time in the year, most hunter-gatherer and agrarian societies in the Northern Hemisphere have a little celebration, which became known as Samhain or Samhain or Halloween in Northern Europe, because life in Northern Europe is very much dictated by the seasons of the year, whereas it's not really dominated by the seasons in a lot of other places. So remaining indigenous peoples in the warmer parts of the world, which is pretty much, if everything's sort of comfortable and you don't have to worry about the scarcity of plants or fruit, then you don't really mark the year in the same sort of way. So if you are, you know, in an area where Northern Europeans have spread out to, such as Australia or Canada or America or anywhere, it's still dominated a little bit by the seasons, but just not so much. So the indigenous people there didn't really develop seasonal festivals. And the reason it's now called Halloween is that's because it's All Hallows Eve, because Christianity, which became the dominant religion in Europe, realised that they weren't going to be able to change these seasonal festivals. So instead of Yule, which was the 21st to the 25th of December, we get Christmas. Instead of Easter, instead of Lammas or Imbolg, which is in February time, you know, February, March, which is when life starts coming back to the earth and all the animals start hopping around and plants start showing new growth, you get Easter. You know, they mapped out all the indigenous festivals as Christianity rolled out across Europe from North Africa and the Middle East. You get all these replacement things so that the Christian celebrations were all at the same time as the what are now called pagan celebrations, or the people that weren't Christians. So yeah, so you've got Easter. So that's that sort of February, March, springtime festival where you celebrate life coming back to the earth. In May, you get things like Beltane on the 5th of May, and that would be Whitsun in the Christian calendar. And then you get other things. So the four main festivals of the year in a pagan society that's just counting moon phases and full moons to work its way through the year. So at the very beginning of the year, you had Samhain, because the pagan peoples of Europe counted when stuff started to die off for winter as the beginning of the year. So it's kind of like a pagan new year. And there are still people that celebrate it. I was one of them for a while, which is why I know about this stuff. So you get Samhain at around the end of October, or the last full moon in October. And then you go on to Yule in December, which is the midsummer point where the days start to get warmer. It's not actually warm, but it's the very sort of darkest part of the winter, and that's where you get the winter equinox, or the shortest day. Well, not the equinox, but you get the shortest day, and then all the days start getting longer from then on in, which is an astronomical phenomenon. You know, it's the sun it's the least amount of height in the rise of the sun and the shortest day measurable in the year. And as I said, you can see the pole star directly above the sun, and the sun just sits on the horizon more or less and doesn't do very much at all, just raises a few degrees. And that's supposed to be the reason that Stonehenge was built, so you could actually watch the days start getting longer. Then you move on to what can sometimes be called Bridgetnacht, or can be called Imbolg, and that's at the end of February, and then all the animals start doing their thing and you can hunt and stuff like that. And because agrarian societies, from that point on, you're going to be working very hard. It's also a very good time to give birth just before all the hard work begins, so your babies can, for animals as well, your babies can start to you don't really want to have a baby born in the middle of winter, because it's extra work to keep that baby cold, to keep the mother fed enough to produce milk, in animals as well as humans. And then you get Beltane a few months later in May. So you go February, April, May, so that's 3 months later. And if you count, so that's 3 months after it's a good time to have a baby, to actually give birth to a baby. And then on Beltane, it was tradition for the young people who were courting to go off into the woods and be together, and that's a very good time to get pregnant, because 9 months after that you're back to Imbolg, which is a good time to give birth. It's just how humans do it. So it's a really, if you're having to hunt and gather your own food, February, March is a very good time to get pregnant if you're going to get pregnant, because it means that you're pregnant throughout the winter and your baby isn't, you know, going to suffer from the cold. So less illness, and your baby's born in the springtime, and that's why Easter cards often have spring lambs or images of new life and stuff like that. And then there's not much. There's a midsummer solstice, which is an equinox. So when you get to the longest day of the year, there's another celebration, because it's something that early people can easily spot. And then you get back to Samhain. So you've got 4 what are known as Sabbats in the pagan calendar, and we'll just go through them again. So you get Samhain, which is around the end of October. You get Yule, which is in the, you know, at the end of December. Then you get Imbolg, and then Beltane. So those are your 4 big celebrations of the year, and they're subdivided into a further 4 with the spring equinox and the autumn equinox, the longest day and the shortest day. So yeah, I hope that explains it. But basically Christianity had to have its celebrations at the same time, because while Christianity wasn't the dominant religion, people would sort of like slope off and enjoy their more traditional celebrations that they've been enjoying for thousands and thousands of years before Christianity turned up. And Christianity moved in on those dates and those celebrations, as well as on a lot of sacred sites, you know, special hills, you know, special wells, you know, places where the water was clean that were considered sacred. And you'll find a lot of churches are built upon those places, so that when people went to be at their sacred places, they ended up absorbing Christianity by osmosis, in Northern Europe especially. So I hope that explains everything to you, Matilda. And yeah, so I studied that for a long time, about 20 years ago, and I haven't really forgotten it. But that's the evolution of celebrations like Christmas and Halloween and Easter and stuff like that. So that's one thing, because we always, or I always try to answer people's questions, and it was a pleasure to answer that one for you, Matilda, and it's great to know that you're watching the Urban Agoge show. So cool. So today is part 2 of Woodland Starbucks, where I'm gonna have another coffee, and we're gonna have another go with this triple fuel wood burning stove. And today's fuel is hexamine. So I'm gonna set that all up and show you what I'm gonna do with that. See you in a minute. Okay, so I've got my river water again. It's in the Grail. Try not to drink river water, even if you are boiling it, because there are all sorts of nasties in there. And I'm really enjoying having this piece of equipment, because it's like being able to carry 150 litres of water with you, and that is cool. It's very cool. And you know, I live in England, loads of water everywhere. So I've filled that up and I've plunged it down, and yeah, it's getting a little bit easier, which is a good thing. And I'm going to put it in my MSR kettle. Thanks very much, Kevin is a geek. And if we move over here, you can see these little tablets here, and these are hexamine. It comes in various shapes and sizes. I like the little round tablets, because you've got more of you've got more control over how long it's going to burn for with hexamine than you have, say, with meths. Although if you get used to filling it up to the meths burner to a certain height, you'll quickly get used to it and you'll stop wasting meths quite so much. So now I've got to do something that's going to take a little bit. So I've got to light one of these. I'm going to put 3 on today, and I've reversed the fire pan, which is the little metal bit that's supporting the hexamine, so it's higher up and therefore nearer to the water. So I'm going to light this, and then I'll show it to you again. So bear with me a sec. So you can just see that on camera. So you can actually hold these tablets in your hand and light them, and this is burning away merrily. So I'm now going to add my water to the top of the thing. So I've put 3 in, and the easiest way to do that and to catch it on fire is to sort of plonk them on top of each other. Now the bottom one's lit, I can just put that together, and that should catch the others on fire quite nicely. So I'm going to put the pot on. See you in a tick. So that's our kettle going. I'll just lift this up. Now, this is going to prove one of the salient points about these wood gasifier stoves. And tomorrow we'll be showing you why they're called wood gasifier stoves, and that you can actually set a little wood fire to go in them. And I've forgotten to get my seating pad out. So there's my seating pad because I'm sitting on damp earth. Rule number 1 of bushcrafting in comfort. Is don't get your bum wet if you don't need to. Believe me, if you've spent enough time on boats, you will get a very wet bum whether you want to or not. And if it's a bit like being a cat. If you watch a cat very carefully, you will notice that cats will do nearly anything to have a dry bottom. And that's because it will affect your mood amazingly, and you can get a chill, and you actually can get hemorrhoids, which is a pretty unpleasant thing. And Matilda, if you want to ask your dad what those are, I'm sure he'll tell you, and it can be a very painful experience. So let's not do that, because that's a thing that, you know, if you are not comfortable, you are going to be grumpy, and if you are grumpy, you make stupid decisions. So from a survival standpoint, if you can get a little pad to put under your bum that is non-water permeable, then that will make your life, you know, much, much better. So, you know, if you want to know why you should have a dry bum, ask a cat. So as you can see, this is burning just as well, and it's going really, really quickly. Let's have a look at the water. Yep, you can see some steam rising off the water, and you can see I can see some tiny little bubbles. Let's get that a bit more centered. Again, thanks very much, Kevin is a geek. I don't know why you felt no need to have this, but you know, let's go. So yeah, well, that won't take long to boil at all. And I've got my Cafe Direct or Smart Cafe mug, again with its usual mixture of coffee and sugar and whitener, so that's already prepared. So yeah, so if I lift this off now, you can see that the hexamen's burning. And I usually find that about 3 of those, they're about 15% consumed, but the water's already heating up really rapid. So yeah, I am really liking the Grail water purifying system. At the moment on eBay it's extremely cheap. Your mileage may vary, but I picked that one up for 22 quid, including postage, including the filter. So you can keep watching this. This isn't going to take long to boil at all. And then I'll have coffee. So hexamen's really good. It was made most famous really, and is most in use as a result of the army switching to hexamen in the 1970s as a portable heating fuel. You can cook your food on it, you can start a fire with it. Obviously anything that will actually burn is good for starting a fire. So if you had some hexamen, and I recommend you should, in your fire starting kit, then you know, you'd be good to go. You can use one tablet, pile twigs and tinder around it, and it will get things going. And the great thing about it is you can light it with an ordinary cigarette lighter, and then but you can hold on to it. And I like the little round pellets because you get better control over the burn time, and these big square tablets are problematic for me because I used to use those, but they have a habit of, they're less dense and they look like bits of Kendal mint cake, and they have a habit of just going bang if you get them wet and then you try and light them, whereas the round ones never really have for me. You know, I've got them damp and they've still burned. So it's a fuel that can survive a dunking in water, although if you leave it in water for a while it will start to disintegrate. Even the round tablets will, but the square ones will start to disintegrate almost immediately, and that's pretty scary because I have actually had one of those tablets just literally explode when it's on fire. So yeah, as you can see, we're a couple of minutes into having it on fire. As far as cost goes, in the UK, for about £9 you can buy 48 hexamen tablets, which means they're under 20p each. And for survival kit, you know, if you really have to bug out, then essentially survival kit is always worth the money, but hexamen tablets are pretty cheap. If you can find them cheaper, buy them, but it's like meths, you know, it's a little bit pricey. 2 pounds of meths will probably do you about is about half a litre or a pint of meths, and that will give you, I would say, about 15 or 16, no, let's say a dozen. You probably have a dozen cooking sessions off a bottle of meths, and if you're going to use 2 or 3 hexamine tablets to cook your food, you know, so that brings it down to, you know, probably cost, you'll get 24 meals out of a pack of 48 hexamine tablets. But even if you can't get that many, just having a dozen or so in your bug out bag or your adventure bag is a good idea. And if you put hexamine tablets in one of these wood burning stoves, they'll be much more efficient because you'll get oxygen. If you notice, there's not much of a gap between the hexamine tablets and the pot of water. So, you know, but that's because it's designed as a wood burning stove, so there are air holes in it and the air is fed over the top of the fuel. So I'm just going to put the lid back on because I think that will help it boil a bit more effectively. So yeah, and we're enjoying another dry day on my little bit of river. That actually will teach you a thing or two about people, in that it's slightly more difficult to get to than the other parts of the woods, so you never really find anybody here, which is a good thing. And I'm literally only about 50 yards from the bridge. Let me just pop that down. You can enjoy the river. I'll give you a nice pan shot. Maybe not. Not with a gimbal anyway. And there we go. So I'm just gonna always put something over your hands. I'm checking it out. And the water's boiling. I'm going to add it to my coffee, or it's as close to boiling. As I need it to be for coffee. If you're boiling pasta, you do not need to maintain that boil. The pasta will continue to cook just in the hot water. There's my coffee brew. Put the little plunger on and leave it there for a little while. And yeah, so that's 2 things. So we've got, when I can control the camera, it'll be 2 things. So that's like the history of Christian festivals. Using hexamine as a fuel, it's not bad. It is flammable, but yeah, you have to hold a lighter against it for quite some while before you burn stuff. It's a bit like when people say, oh, that's a fire hazard. Like, most things, you know, cardboard doesn't really want to burn, it'll produce more smoke than flame. You know, when people sort of look at things are flammable, but unless it's like really tinder dry, there's nothing to it really. So yeah. But yeah, if you're going to get out to the woods, you know, you can do a lot worse than having a hot drink while you're out here. I prefer coffee. You might like tea, or you might wish to learn about which plants, you know, you can use as a tea and which things that you like. Or, you know, and it's a good idea, you know, if you have an adventure bag, a couple of tea bags, a couple of sachets of coffee, you know, they don't weigh anything and they will vastly improve your mood if you suddenly have to rely on all this equipment. But if you just had something like a water purifier, then you've bought yourself a heck of a lot of time before you have to really start looking at plants. And I would say, before you buy a knife, which is most bushcrafty people's you know, first choice. Yes, it's good to have a tool, but if we look at the river, I'm sure you can get imaginative, and at least your first tool will probably be some kind of hammer made from a rock, or a hammer and anvil, like a big heavy rock and a smaller rock. You'll be able to open nuts and stuff like that, crack open seed pods, you know, bash super dry wood down to tinder. You can do an awful lot with just a couple of handy rocks. And if you manage to find flint, which we're not going to here, so I'm not even going to look, the only flint you're going to find here is from somewhere else. In the UK, this particular bit of northern England is almost famous for its lack of flint. Okay, it's not a good idea to use wet rocks from the river as placekeepers for like a fireplace or anything like that, because some of those rocks are porous and there will be water inside them, and when you put them near a fire and they get hot, the water inside the stones, and it only has to be a little tiny amount that's seeped into the main body of the stone, will cause the stone to explode. So as a wise philosopher said, important safety tip, Egon. Get an old person to explain that to you. So yeah, so long before you buy a knife, I would say a water purifier for your adventures, and yeah, and a pot that you can use. You don't have to spend a lot of money, but if you're going to be you know, investing in your outdoors kit, you know, get a bag first, then get a little wood burner type stove and a pot to go on it and a water purifier, and that will mean you can have more in an adventure, because you would be amazed at how comfortable you feel if you can make yourself a hot drink or a hot meal in the woods. It literally nails you in place. There is something about being a human that if you sit down and you eat something, even if you've just brought some biscuits and a hot drink, you feel you are kind of at home. Your brain literally lays down engrams that say, this is familiar to me, I have eaten. And also, if you're checking out wild plants, a very, very good book, if you're in the UK, is Richard Maybe's Food for Free, which will tell you about all the berries and plants and some of the mushrooms that you can eat. And if you're elsewhere, you probably want to look to something else. But the important thing about a book of edible plants is it needs to be designed for where you are, but also needs to be lightweight enough that you can put it in your adventure bag or your bushcrafting bag and always take it with you. And put it in a Ziploc sandwich bag, because, you know, you might drop your bag in the water or it might rain heavily, and it would really suck if you needed to rely on it and you opened it up and it was just a pile of paper mush. So yeah, Ziploc bags. In fact, take a couple. And also a garbage bag or something like that. And if I reach down into my thing, yeah, see, plastic bag, at least one plastic bag, and ideally a garbage bag and a couple of Ziploc bags, because those are things that it took us thousands of years to develop as Stone Age people. Thousands of years to sort out containers. And if you've got a Ziploc bag and water is hard to get to, you can actually seal up the Ziploc bag, and if you're very careful, you can carry stuff. Maybe even if you get some small sandwich bags and you get like a woolly hat or something like that, you can put the sandwich bag in the woolly hat, fill the sandwich bag with water, close the Ziploc seal, and then put it in your woolly hat, and you've got like a portable water container, so you can carry more water. Again, if you're careful. Got to be pretty careful. So yeah. So we've got technology 1 in the form of fire, and we're surrounded by tool 1 in the form of rocks. But it's a very nice morning. Lovely blue sky. Don't know if you can quite catch that. It's actually a really nice day, which, considering it's right at the end of October, and we still haven't left the EU, but I've got a horrible feeling that's going to come to pass. Oh, that proper bothers me. We have to respect the referendum, is the cry of, you know, basically cowardly politicians right now. Oh, you've got to respect the referendum. Just over half the people have got to completely screw up the lives of the other half and themselves. There is now no good reason for leaving the EU. Nobody has ever come up with a good reason that wasn't a lie. So yeah. I'm sorry, Matilda, I brought politics into this episode that you're probably sitting down and watching. But if I'm going to teach anything to a small person, yeah, grown-ups are capable of acts of utter stupidity. Don't trust them. Just because they're older than you doesn't mean they necessarily know best. Except maybe your dad. Your dad's an intelligent person. So yeah, nice and relaxed by the river, and my coffee's brewed. So these, let's put that up. So these Cafe Direct mugs are pretty damn good. You can use them for all sorts of things. You can use them for tea. Obviously you can use them for things like cup of soups and stuff like that, you know. And if you haven't brought a spoon, you're surrounded by twigs. Make one. You only need to make a stirring stick, and then you're actually as smart as a chimpanzee if you use a stick to do stuff. And over time, if you get hold of a knife, you can carve something a little bit better. What I do when I've made a spoon is carve the spoon out, sand it down, and rub some oil into it. Vegetable oil usually does the trick, and is nice and food safe. But cheers. So that's about it for today. Yeah, sitting by the river with my cup of coffee. Life's good. And yeah, sitting in the woods allows you to de-stress. And apologies for people that watch this and have tried to phone me, specifically my friend Dean. I don't take my mobile phone with me. You know, there aren't many emergencies that I would be able to do anything about if I have to travel a long distance and do anything about immediately. And you know, if you need help that quickly, that 20 minutes or half an hour is going to render that help undoable, then you probably need to call the police or an ambulance or something like that. And you can hear the train behind me. So yeah, so I hope that was at least interesting. And if you can think of any things of like low-level bushcraft and wandering in the woods type stuff that you'd like to see, you know, that's definitely what comments are for. But I thought I'd do something a little bit different from my usual wander around the woods ranting about all the things that are wrong with the world and how it could be better. But yeah, this is phase 2, you know, doing slightly more interesting stuff. And if you're out in the woods most days, you are getting, you know, a reasonable amount of exercise. You know, walking around is about a third as useful to you as running, although it is handy to be able to run. I do want to get back into that next week and make it a more regular thing, so you'll unfortunately have to tolerate some running videos. But I think that's all I've got to say for now. I will be back ideally tomorrow, and tomorrow we're doing a slightly more complicated fire for my coffee, in that I'll be using a fire steel and getting my fire lit, which will involve a lot more scavenging around, because I'll be using a fire steel and naturally available tinder. So I'll be using birch bark, small twigs, small sticks, and we'll be using dry wood. So I'll be looking for some fallen dry wood. I might even stack some up on my way out today so I can pick that up tomorrow. But it's likely to be raining tomorrow, so that might well be under a tarp. But I think I can find somewhere to put a tarp up, and I've got my trusty mat so I can sit down without getting a wet bottom. So yeah, thanks for watching. Do take care.